Does that sound something, that would be something that would be possible or of interest to people in this room? You know, I mean, obviously, we're gonna be sending this out more widely, but or do you think that might be too tricky in terms of time and responsibilities elsewhere and all that?
Well, just as a personal, like, I feel like I'm talking too much, but as a personal, like, what you put here is very exciting. And it is something that I'll use in my work. So, that I'm just putting it out there, like, this is not just, you know, I love books. I put them on, I read them and I put them on the shelf and I pull things out of them, but this seems to be like it has a resonance of something also that I can use in my work with students and, you know, as a, not as a textbook, but as a textbook, if that makes sense.
As an untextbook.
As an untextbook. As a collaboration manual, you know, or something. Anyway, just putting it.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice idea in terms of what it could be used for. I think a lot of like the vision, I mean, this is what me and Sophie were talking about today, we're like, we have a title when we don't have the submissions yet. You know, like, I think a lot of the vision in terms of audience and in terms of things like that and design, all of that is going to develop as the book develops and as the content develops. But I think it will be like really integral to the process to see what people come up with. But I guess in that way, like submissions will determine a lot of like the vision of the project, right?
It'll be challenging, I think, to convey. I mean, it's great to have you guys here and have this conversation for us. But if you're sending it for all the way out, it'll be challenging to convey what has been discussed
It's very true.
in a nuanced way.
Yes. I think we will be including some of the discussions though, I think, and we'll rewrite the call for submissions to some extent, to reflect this conversation, because, I think there's some really great points that should be in there, and, so that's one step, but you're right, I mean, we can't, we don't unfortunately have the luxury of being able to have too many of these kinds of meetings, but, maybe we could think of another time we could have it in this.
Right now, the subject seems to be collaboration. Reconciliation leads the description. We haven't talked about that whatsoever. I think we're all creative people who come up with creative projects, and they're all going in multiple directions. What's the point? Have you got some thoughts about reconciliation, or is this a part you're hoping people will fill in those blanks, or what's going on?
Well, it definitely did start with the ideas of reconciliation as very much a contested space, and really thinking back to that symposium at Algoma, like the kinds of discussions we had around that term. And I think what did strongly emerge from those discussions was that reconciliation was something that had been that started many conversations off on the wrong foot. That reconciliation had become something that was a funding, a sort of an industry with funding and so on, that did not really speak to, I guess, the challenges that decolonizing, I suppose decolonization emerged as something in opposition to reconciliation. But at the same time, it seemed in those discussions that for whatever reason, and I wonder why really, we kept circling back to this concept of reconciliation? And is it just because the TRC is occurring? Is it because of funding structures? Is it because it invokes notions of relationships between settler and Indigenous communities, but does so in a really inadequate way? Why is it that we keep returning to reconciliation? I'm not sure I know why. But I think that this project did certainly emerge from those discussions, which again took up reconciliation in very critical ways, and so it's hard to know. Some people will ultimately just say, no, that's not a topic that I find useful. It's a dead end, and others will find a way, perhaps, to kick that term in a direction that is politically or critically or creatively useful. Don't know.
My feeling about, if you're referring to the Algoma
Yeah.
thing, that if it circled back to reconciliation, because it very quickly and clearly diverged from that
Mhm.
concept. And if it was circled back, it was because that was the framework. So it was named.
Yeah.
It was named. you
Yeah.
know, in every way
Yeah.
in the publication.
Yeah.
So I think that, and there were people with different investments
Mhm.
in that terminology and that
Mhm.
concept of this.
Yeah.
And so there was a a solid path for people to return because of that was
Yeah. Well, and this grant itself, the title includes the word reconciliation, and there's no reason why we have to produce something with that term, but it's interesting that those economic, I guess, material relations, do underpin our work, to some extent, and but yeah, I think that it's very possible that if we do turn to the concept of collaboration with an entirely abandon reconciliation, is that just substituting, one word for another? I don't know.
I'd be interested to hear whether people think the idea, like the core concept that I'm taking from reconciliation while leaving the rest of it behind is, like I said earlier, there is a role that art plays in, if you think about song, if you think about dance, if you think about all forms of art, the role that it plays in healing or in creating relationships and creating strength and healthy communities in the aftermath of, or, in this context would be during, these ongoing sort of traumatic events. It seems like there's a couple things that seem worthwhile looking at to me, and I'd be interested in hearing from other people, but one of the things is that the narrative of Canada that's being built up in elementary and high schools right now is, in terms of when they're talking about Indigenous stuff at all, they're talking about everybody's coming out of there knowing about residential school in this very limited way. And so now the narrative is one of this is the bad thing that happened, and now we have reconciliation. And so a lot of people are understanding Indigenous settler relationships that way, and that's really problematic. So that there's been all this really good work done, say by Glenn Coulthard and other people who are critiquing that narrative, right? So we could see this as an opportunity to engage in that and to present alternatives. So while it's, or is this a worthwhile topic? Maybe not.
Yeah, I think that the title and in the request for submissions, because you have the word reconciliation, which has that, I guess, we're talking about this, these connotations of oppositional perspectives that need to be reconciled or something like that. And then you're asking for collaborative projects. It's almost like because that has those kind of similar connotations we can have. So then it kind of frames the nature of the collaboration before it's even begun. I think maybe that's the problematic part.
Yeah. We are going to not use this title.
Right.
We thought of a different working title, could be reconsidering reconciliation, but maybe we should just take reconciliation as a working title at all.
I thought it was interesting when we started talking about decolonization as a possibility. I think that could be maybe more interesting in soliciting responses.
I think that's a language that more people are using, or
Yeah.
more people that I would want me to be using. I don't think we can ignore the fact that we have this very top-down, uneven budget controlled, as where on my local, the city of Vancouver declares a year of reconciliation. Like this discourse, this language, and these moments are happening in very clear ways and are directly and formally connected to communities. So I think, no matter our position relative to this idea, which I can hear or have heard is quite critical, this is happening. So maybe in terms of framing the project, it's about acknowledging that process is underway. It's not our process necessarily.
Exactly, yeah, that's well said.
That process is underway and that there's also a critique of
Yeah.
that process, which is also underway. And that, then kind of.
Well, and I would say that spans, we use the language of critique, but I would say like full-on opposition, resistance to, through to like indifference and a deeper marginalization maybe for some people as well. And a disaffected population feels like it's not their problem at all. So there's lots of positions with multiple variables.
There's a chance for us to get out from under, because I don't know about these big institutional forces, because you meet them and it's just Jonathan Dewar or that checks. They're pretty innocuous guys, but they're persistent. And no,
But
it's true.
I absolutely
No, right.
it's like the function of a municipality, for example.
Oh, yeah.
The example I gave.
But what I'm saying is, decolonialization is functionally a post-colonial or non-colonial country. We're in a colonial situation. And I would say coming up with non-colonial practices would be a good idea. And that's where creative strategies might work, because we can bat our head against the wall and problematize things forever, and we'll feel that it's problematized. This text calls into question decolonization. It doesn't offer leadership as to what the alternatives are. I don't know. I mean, coming to this space, I was thinking, like everybody, I want to work with Ayumi. Because the last time when we were gathered together, I really liked some of the things you were saying. I was thinking about, driving through Banff. You've got that pamphlet, "Welcome to Bear Country," and then I was reading a pamphlet in an antique store on. I was in there for a couple of hours because it was from the 1950s. It was an immigration book of what you need to do to pass the test. And it said, we're all a country of immigrants. And the first immigrants came here 10,000 years ago. And it was totally, and there were no other references to Aboriginal people throughout. No, nothing. And I thought, we combine those two pamphlets together and come up with a real guide for Japanese immigration or Ugandan immigration. So, welcome to Indian country. And you can give, a non-colonial narratives, but it would be really great if you had recent or second generation immigrants coming up with what they wish they had known when they've adopted this burden, just as a strategy. That could be a real useful tool that would be tongue-in-cheek and playful in one way, but the answers would be non-authoritative. They would come from multiple voices of people of many generations experience of Aboriginality, who could say, I wish you'd known this, and so on. And it could be a dialogue piece, I think Adrian, was too bad he wasn't here, because he's looking at the Chinese restaurant in his area and then reconnecting with Chinese and Japanese in the second country, which was complex and mutually exclusive, except at that moment of eating. There could be someone mentioned cookbook, could be strategies that way. I'm just thinking of non-colonial creative practices rather than our usual way of being academically creative and not read.
Yeah, Barbara Manili is that what you're thinking, yeah, when you were looking
The
at it?
Stitch project?
No, I'm thinking about Barbara Manili's PhD and the work, the ongoing work that she's doing, where she is taking a number of seminal documents used to for immigration purposes to recruit, you know, Brits, particularly white British people, to Canada, and she's rewriting them. So she has an atlas, a film, and a textbook that positioned Canada in a particular way. You know, oh, the huge tables with food, and come, you know, to the Irish, come because there's food here, there's no food there, and so she's actually remaking the atlas, these three seminal documents. In some cases, very tongue-in-cheek, but you know, it's like one of those things that's happening. And just so I can get this out, because this is an idea that I was thinking about apropos of something that Cecily said, in terms of like, who do we want this book to and how is it used? And I thought, well, what if we went beyond us or beyond the collaborators? And you know, I think about books that I found on a shelf in Bali or somewhere, and where people had written into a book and commented on it, and then it was in somebody else's hand. And what happens to this object when it is gifted, is passed on? And I thought, well, maybe there's space in there for some blank pages or some space in there so that the reader could respond or collaborate, and then this document, which may not remain, you know, I'm not letting mine out of my hands, but no, which may not remain in our hands. Like, what happens when it's passed? And maybe there's something construed around the form or the document that actually implies that it should be passed on. That this is something that is an experience, you know, books and experiences. Many of you and us have talked about, but then it's also something which can be engaged with by people we don't know. You know, that
That's a really
opens up another possibility.
And that sort of reminds me a little bit of Leah and Jamie's project, because people are sewing onto the page in a sense.
And writing in books.
And
the
writing
books
in books.
are
So
very
yes,
important.
the books are very important, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so incorporating that, I guess, where the text itself would have a record of its own journey through readers would be fantastic. But then we'd have to somehow, you know, it would be great to somehow receive them back again.
Well, I'm thinking that you know, in the way that Leah has these books that
Yeah.
document like this whole journey, that
Yeah.
maybe there's something that I don't know how. Maybe these are all logistics, really, but where these books come back together,
Mhm.
and in some way in
Yeah.
some years.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, once again, these wretched QTs.
No, what are they?
QRs, there could be actually an interactive there, although goodness knows the comment scroll,
Mhm.
is pretty hard to stomach most of the time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There has been some.
Yeah, I think if that was gonna happen, then it makes sense to design a very particular way.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah, you don't necessarily have comments from. Yeah, someone before was saying that it was talking about having sound elements
Mhm.
tripped by it. I think that's interesting. You can have or video or
Yeah.
photo sequences or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, rather than having something in the book.
came across
pages was people could scroll what they thought of it. And there's a number of them. And so when you finish reading it, we wrote your comment and passed it along. You never know where it headed to. It was very nice.
Yeah, and so it said in the book, please write your comment.
No,
and then
it was just
it just happened. It just happened.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it just happened.
Let me see.
And there's that practice of leaving books.
Mhm.
And they just, continually passed on, just leaving books in public spaces. Is there a name?
I don't know if there's.
And it's called Leaving Books.
I know it.
No, it's, but it, you know,
That's been
Probably, the marginalia, is that the term for the?
Yeah.
Going into libraries and
Oh,
actually
that's
sticking
the-
books that you
Yes.
wanted.
Yeah.
There's that beautiful text, and it's not an example, but I love it, and I remember women in the community that I work in really taking it up and grabbing them up, and it was the Signs for the City that Bitterniver, and it was basically like a journal with, it went through each day of the year and a day of history, and it chose, like there's researchers that worked on it, and chose a perspective onto that moment in time and what was happening in that location through time, so it was kind of, that layering of history, but most of the page, like probably 90% of the page was blank. So, and it had it was beautifully designed. I don't know who designed it, but had a lovely red bookmark on a great text. It was just a beautiful
Yeah,
text.
we need to find out who designs their books, because they're always so
And it
nice.
probably isn't gonna be cheap. But yeah, just as a journal, like for folks, but not the example.
Mhm.
And it was a book on Edgar Hoover Burns' signs, did you say?
Sign for the City was the name of the
Oh.
project, although it showed gestures in the direction, I suppose.
But it's for, they also did, it's part of the same project where they did the bus stops, right?
Bus
So
stops,
did you
yes,
see
it's
the bus
online.
stops?
Oh, okay.
Sabina Bitter and it's an urban subjects project. I was gonna put it in my thing, but then I ran out of time, but they, had all these bus stops where they would have, like a calendar of the month, and then it would say what happened in the city on different days. It's like a historical sort of project, right?
With very clear political lens, and
Yeah,
things always
yeah.
being shared in terms
Yeah,
of that
for
history,
sure.
like,
That makes me
Like
think
different rap
in
history.
ways that in terms of disseminating this, whatever is made in another context or in a wider context, to do, pages on to bus shelters or, signage.
I think it starts to cost money.
Well, it gotta be done, so we do.
Well, again, City of Vancouver's year of revenue.
Yeah.
And their dance city is lined up with some cash, I don't know what they were planning.
Public space.
Yes.
Or, other more, guerrilla tactics.
Well, is there anything else that we, it's sushi time, we're just waiting for a show.
Was it coming here?
Yes,
Is he gonna?
I'm so hungry.